Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bat Flip Podcast, episode 113. I'm David Westergreen because Damian Leininger is under the weather tonight. With me is Matt Arcara, and we're going to be talking about the AL East tonight. So before we get started, Matt, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. Had a pretty decent weekend and just been hanging out and yeah, everything's been going well. I would ask Damien how he was doing, but I think we've got the answer to that already. He's not talking. So I'll ask you. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing good. Definitely a rough week last week, but we're moving back forward and the start of a new week this week. That much closer to baseball season. Already getting videos of people reported to spring
Yeah.
training, and World Baseball Classic's going to start up really soon. It's NASCAR started yesterday. Everything's kind of starting to come together finally, but for the spring, kind of get rid of this winter because it's just finally starting to warm up here in Chicago too. So kind of looking up. Definitely a positive weekend overall after kind of a bad week last week. So let's start off with our AL East breakdown. Now we've done this before, um, but we're going to get into each team in the division. But we're going to do it a little bit differently this week. So, and hopefully the rest of this spring to try to kind of cut down on the overall time of these kind of episodes. We're going to talk about maybe give an off-season grade of kind of the moves that we think each team has done, and then we'll talk about one player on the team that we really like, one player that we're worried about in terms of their 2023 performance, and then we'll try to give a prediction of kind of what's going to happen to this team at the end of the season. So, with that, Matt, let's start off with the AL East. Let's talk about the Boston Red Sox.
Ooh, this will be a good doozy to start off with. So I guess we'll start with our off-season grade and kind of what they did, what they didn't do. Maybe for the Red Sox, I think their grade is influenced by a little bit of both. They did add some pieces. I gave them a C for their grade. They added some good pitchers, which or maybe not super good pitchers, but they added some guys that they really needed pitchers, and they went into the bullpen and they addressed it by signing Kenley Jansen and Chris Martin, trading for Richard Blyer, and they added Corey Kluber to the rotation that just didn't have a lot of depth. They added a few pieces to their lineup too. Masataka Yoshida was the Japanese signing they made for the really their big dollar signing, and then they also added Adam Duvall to a short deal. Adalberto Mondesi they made a trade for, and they added Justin Turner as well. So they added a lot of pieces, a lot of veteran pieces in this offseason. And the big thing though for me is that the guy they don't have, and that's Xander Bogaerts. And as I've talked on the show before, I really like Xander Bogaerts as a player. I think he's a consistently great shortstop bat. And before people yell at me, I want to say that I think he is a very similar type of player to Derek Jeter. So people might yell at me for it.
Well,
Some people might yell at me because they think he's way better than Derek Jeter, but I think he's a similar type of player, and now he is not with the Red Sox. So losing him drops my grade, and I give him a C. So
yeah, I've got him as a C plus, based almost identically to your reasoning, but with the one move you didn't mention, and that's extending Rafael Devers to an 11-year, $330 million deal. And I think that was the A plus, absolutely had to do it move of the offseason. Everything else you mentioned though is just drawing me way back that they just didn't do enough. They didn't commit to losing this season, or trying to extend their core to support their future. It's very ambiguous as to what their plan is here, and so I don't really foresee them looking back favorably on this offseason, with the exception of that Rafael Devers deal. He's the guy I want to talk about though, because Rafael Devers is absolutely awesome, and we did talk about him a little bit when we were analyzing that free agent extent or the extension. But Devers is not a particularly good fielder at third base, but he is such a good hitter that I am fully convinced that this is going to, be a huge year for Rafael Devers, like MVP consideration type of year, where he's finally got that security that he can just sit back and go. He doesn't have to prove anything. He's just going to go out there and have fun and play baseball. I really like the potential that Rafael Devers brings, that he can kind of mash in the middle of this lineup. where maybe he gets like a 20% walk rate type of year, because the rest of the lineup is so weak, he just kind of becomes that feared hitter in the lineup where either pitchers are overpitching, making mistakes, and getting crushed, or they're pitching around Rafael Devers in this lineup and just getting out the other eight guys, to where he just ends up with a massive year and the rest of this team just kind of falters around him.
Yeah, I I think that Rafael Devers has a chance to have a really good year. The only thing about Rafael Devers is that I do worry a little bit about when he's not in a lineup that is really really good and people are pitching around him a little bit. How aggressive is he going to be? Is he going to be
Yeah,
overly aggressive? Because his walk rates have never been all that great. Like they're fine, but they haven't been like elite walk rates in his career. And I worry a little bit that he might start to get frustrated and try to and start chasing a little bit more with that being the case. I mean, his career high walk rate is 9% in 2021. This year it was 8.1%, which those are totally fine. They're average to above average the last couple of years, but it's one of those things where I worry a little bit about him, chasing a little bit too much. But I wanted to, I mean, and Rafael Devers is the obvious answer to which players do you like for this team, because there's just not a lot of players that I like there. But I did want to shout out somebody else because I think that sometimes it's the obvious one here is it's not my favorite one to shout out, but I wanted to put Tristan Casas up there. I think that he is a guy who he's a top prospect. He was picked in the or he's been coming up. He's been in the top 100 list forever, top 40 prospect. Got called up last year to the big league club, and he had a 120 WRC plus with the big league club. That happened while running a 208 BABIP. In his career, he has put up elite plate discipline numbers. Walk rates in AAA being 14, between 14 and 20% over the last 2 years in 2021 and 2022. Not a ton of games there. It's an 81 game sample size, but he's got a good eye at the plate. He doesn't strike out an awful lot, and he's got pretty decent pop. Last year in 72 games at AAA, he had 11 home runs. I mean, that's not crazy numbers, but that's on pace for 25, 26 homers if over the course of 162 games. So I think that Tristan Casas could be a guy who breaks out a little bit offensively for this team this year. It's something they desperately need. They've been missing a first baseman for a long time, so I do like Tristan Casas going into this year.
awesome, yeah. And you know, Casas kind of leads a crop of young players that Boston does have, which is why I kind of wish they were a little more direct with what they were going for this offseason. Who is a player that you are worried about going into this year?
Um, well, this is a team that has so many players you could be worried about. I mean, because they have a lot of their free agent pickups were aging bullpen arms and aging starting pitchers and aging infielders and
Mm-hmm.
aging outfielders. I mean, they
Mm-hmm.
added a little bit of everything as long as it was aging. But I worry about I mean, it's just so many guys you could pick. You could pick Justin Turner. I mean, he's 38 years old. He didn't play a ton last year. He showed some signs of slowing down with the power. You could pick, I mean, any of their pitchers really. They all have injury risk or aging, except for maybe Garrett Whitlock, who you just don't know what he's going to be as a full time rotation arm. But the guy I went ahead and picked is just because he's a guy that at a position that they really needed, and that is back into the bullpen closing. And they haven't had anybody locking that down since Craig Kimbrell was still good. And Kenley Jansen is the guy that I picked. I just last year he was with the Braves, and I liked him. I liked what he did. He did a fine job, but I just didn't he didn't seem like he was quite the same guy last year, even when he was going through his good stretches as he had been in the past. Even like going back to 2021 when he was with the Dodgers and he was under a lot of criticism, when he looked good, he looked extremely good. Like he looked untouchable still. I mean, he always has gone through, last 3 or 4 years, he's gone through a phase where he wasn't great for a month. But this past year, even when he was like putting up good numbers, he was still it just felt like it maybe he wasn't the same guy as he had been in the past. And I mean, he's 35 years old. He's a big guy. He's got those health issues too. The concern about the heart that he's had in the past. He's been on the IL, I think, like 3 years in a row for a stint with that heart issue. Um, I worry a little bit about Kenley Jansen. That's a guy that the Red Sox really need, and they spent a lot of money on him for an aging reliever. So we'll see what happens. I hope Kenley Jansen does well because I really really like him. But maybe we'll see what happens this year. The projection systems have him penciled in at like an almost 4 ERA this coming up year, and for a guy you're signing a lot of money for a closer, I just don't think that's what you want to see. So
I gotcha. I'm gonna change my answer from what I wrote down on our sheet actually because I my initial thought is Masataka Yoshida. I don't know enough about him to
yeah,
be able to make that educated guess. I will say that the 2023 projection that shows him hitting over 300 with a 380 on base percentage, he's not going to hit that. There's no way,
no,
right? There's just no shot. I compare him maybe unfavorably to Seiya Suzuki, who came over and hit 262, 336, 433 for a 116 WRC plus, and that was a pretty successful debut, all things considered. So, if he gets to those numbers, I'll be surprised because he had less of a reputation than Seiya Suzuki did in Japan. So there you go. My guy is going to be their catching situation in general, right? It's Reese McGuire and Jorge Alfaro currently is their catching situation for the Red Sox. They've lost Christian Vasquez. They currently have nobody to replace the production of Christian Vasquez. Not to mention, I don't think Reese McGuire is an okay defensive catcher, but I just think they are going to suffer defensively at catcher and then just offensively as well. Reese McGuire is kind of a backup. He's really not a guy who needs to be starting every day at catcher. And then Jorge Alfaro has been very inconsistent to start his career and is not viewed favorably in the framing or game calling department. So um, I do not like this catching situation. It's not going to help the pitching staff. One pitcher though, I will say I'm with you on Kenley Jansen. I think John Schreiber has the closer's job by June, and I think he runs with it. John Schreiber's really nasty, so guy to look out for there. I think Kenley's going to not be nearly as good as some of those other guys in the bullpen. But you're right, aging staff, a lot of problems here.
yeah, and you mentioned the catcher situation. I would not be super surprised for them to come out of spring training and maybe trade for one of those guys who signed minor league deals. A guy like maybe a
Hmm.
Roberto Perez or somebody just to add a defensive replacement type catcher. I see Kevin Plawecki's still out there in the free agent market. So, I mean, I guess a guy like that maybe too, just add a defensive catcher
That
type.
it's
Um,
not going to help.
I mean, it won't, but like,
Yeah,
just, I mean, it might be better than what they've got now, Jorge Alfaro. I mean,
right.
um, but yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that's an issue for them, and I agree on Yoshida too. I mean, I feel like I might be a little bit higher on him than you are, but I, I think he's might be a little bit safer of a prospect than Seiya, even though he doesn't have the upside. If I had to
Sure, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a little safer, but he might not have the upside. But I think he'll be a somewhat productive hitter at the plate. And they gave him a lot of money though, they gave him a
Yeah,
lot of
the
money
more money than
for
say I got.
his
Yeah.
yeah. It's kind of crazy, but yeah, just I guess we'll look at our outlooks here, and my outlook is out of the teams in this division, I just this seems like the weakest team on paper to me. I mean, they don't
Hmm.
really have a standout spot. I mean, their lineup seems to be like maybe at league average. I mean, if you had there's a scenario where a couple of these veterans end up doing really, really well for this team. There's a scenario where I'm not saying that the scenario is 107 wins. There's a scenario where they're somewhat similar to the 2021 Giants, where they have all these veterans who at one time in the not super distant past were really, really good, and a couple of them have bounce back years. A guy like Justin Turner, maybe a pitcher like maybe James Paxton and Chris Sale both decide to, for one time, once in their lives, be healthy all year, and these bullpen arms maybe all end up repeating last year. I mean, there's a scenario where this team ends up being decent. They're not the worst team in baseball, but I mean, there's way more question marks with this team than I think with any other team in this division on all three levels. I mean, there's a scenario where their lineup's awful. There's a scenario where their rotation is awful. There's a scenario where their bullpen is awful, and I think that they'll end up somewhere kind of like, I don't know. They'll end up with something like in this division, maybe not, but somewhere around 70 wins ish.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they're going to be like a 100 loss team or something unless they just sell off everybody, which is possible. But I think they'll end up somewhere like around 70 to 75 wins. So we'll see what happens with them, though. I mean, there is some upside with this team, but um, I don't especially like what they've done, and on paper, this roster is just not all that great. So
Yeah, I've got them selling at the deadline. I
yeah,
just I think they're going to try to extract as much value as they can from maybe a Chris Sale or Paxton if any of them are healthy. If Kluber stays healthy, he'll just get flipped.
yeah,
You know, Jansen might even get flipped, right? I don't think Chris Martin's tradable, unless he's like really really good. But he only went for Zach McKinstry last year on a 1 year deal with much less money involved. So, um, you know, the position players are all kind of weak. We didn't talk about them all, but yeah, I just think they're going to try to extract value from this roster wherever they can. So let's move to the number two team, or the fourth best team in the AL East from last season, that being the Baltimore Orioles. So for our offseason grade, I gave them a C minus because I really didn't feel like the Orioles added very much at all. Matt, what'd you give them?
I gave them a D plus. It's hard with this team because in some ways I felt like they probably should have added a lot because they were close last year, but in some ways I also kind of felt like they're they're due for some regression and that maybe stay in the course for one more year while some of these young guys end up coming up to the big league level and getting their footing and then spending big might be the case that you like to see. I mean, they added Adam Frazier, who I mean, I don't really think he's all that good. I mean, he's all right.
Yep.
He'll play. He'll play every day, or most days at least. But he's a guy that you're not scared that you're gonna. He's not blocking anybody. I mean, that's one thing with a
Mm-hmm.
lot of their moves. They're adding guys who maybe could help a little bit without blocking anybody. I mean, they brought in James McCann in a trade as to be their backup catcher behind Rutschman, which is fine. And they added pitchers. They added Kyle Gibson for some reason. They added Cole Irvin for some reason. Well, Cole Irvin's better than for some reason. He's not that bad. Um, honestly that trade wasn't that bad, but they added a couple of bullpen arms. Michael Givens is one who I'm not real high on him and never really have been, but I don't know. I mean, this team just seems to be it seems like if I were the Orioles, I would have added more pitching. I would have gone out
Yep.
and gotten some more pitching. I think that the lineup is honestly good. I mean, even with not adding a lot, their lineup is fine. Like there's really only two weak spots in their lineup in Kyle Stowers, who's also really young, and he could end up turning into something too. And then Adam Frazier maybe too, but they've got prospects still coming up too. Some of the guys Westberg, I believe is his name.
Yep. Jordan Westberg.
He'll probably end up in the big leagues this year, even though he's not like projected as one of their opening
Mm-hmm.
day guys. So, if Adam Frazier gets replaced by him, then I mean that's an upgrade. I mean Ramon Urias could shift over and they could move Gunnar Henderson to third and have Westberg play short or so. I don't know, but they have a really really good and then of course Grayson Rodriguez is going to be a huge add as a guy who will be in the big leagues this year and healthy, and I think he's going to immediately come in and be really good. Um, but yeah, I mean, I just don't think they did quite enough on the pitching side. I mean, they only have one pitcher that's projected for a better than 4 ERA, and that's Grayson Rodriguez, who, I mean,
Hasn't pitched. Yeah.
hasn't pitched in the big leagues. So
That's it's a tough team to look at right now because I agree. I wish they would have added just a little bit more. Hence the bad grade. But the moves they made are not bad moves, right? Eating pitchers in Kyle Gibson and Cole Irvin. Those guys are going to be able to throw 150 plus innings this year. Which takes the pressure off of Grayson Rodriguez and DL Hall. It allows for some of those young pitchers to come up and develop. Remember also with that DH spot, they've got some non-roster invites that are kind of interesting at that kind of spot, like Ryan O'Hearn and Curtis Terry. Also, Colton Cowser's got a non-roster invite, which he's one of their top prospects. Plays center field, but he could probably sit in at DH if they needed him to, right? Like this, that's a really really athletic dude who could come in and send Santander to the DH spot. I love the potential with this team, but they just didn't do enough in the offseason. For player I like, I'll go with Adley Rutschman. It's you can't we can't talk enough about Adley Rutschman. I don't think he's maybe going to be the best catcher in baseball for the next long while. Had an incredible rookie debut with 5.3 wins above replacement in just 113 games. Guy is an elite defensive catcher, already a great game caller. Everybody just kind of knows this guy is so bright in terms of baseball IQ and just the way he is able to kind of analyze the hitters in front of him. He's a good hitter, great approach, doesn't strike out, walks a ton. Just everything you could possibly want in a starting catcher, and I feel like he's going to be an all star. I can't wait to watch this guy catch, and I want him to catch Grayson Rodriguez. I can't wait for Grayson. Just electric stuff, great off speed, great fastball. He got hurt, had a I think it's a lat strain last year, and they just shut him down. They said, "Look, it's no big deal. We'll get you healthy." He was pitching at the end of the season, and he looked fantastic again. I really believe Grayson's gonna, and throwing to Adley is gonna be like the next Wainwright to Yachty type of like elite connection with a pitcher and a catcher in Major League Baseball going forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about. I mean, both of those guys are incredible. But the guy I picked, I went ahead and went with Gunnar Henderson. I really like him. I think that he's a guy who I had some concerns about in the past. When after his draft and just as he started to come up the ranks, about his swing and miss. But last year, the thing that really got me on his side, he went from a roughly 30 or really over 30% strikeout rate to a 18.3% strikeout rate in Double A last year. And I think that when he did that,
Yeah,
that really impressed me that he dropped that much off his strikeout rate. And then in AAA, in his first cup of coffee there, 65 games, his strikeout rate was back up some, but it was 26%, which is doable for a guy that has his kind of pop and his kind of profile. And then at the big league level, it was in 34 games, it was only 26%. So this is a guy who, he cut his strikeout rate while going up levels at age 21. He walks a lot. He's got a good eye, and I mean, in the big leagues last year at age 21, he had a 126 WRC plus without any really red flag like peripherals that were out of control. Even though it was a small sample size, a 333 BABIP's in line with his minor league numbers. Actually, it's a career low. Well, I guess in 2021 he's 313 in high A, but I mean he is right in line. And the projection systems, Zips, has him projected for 5 WAR in 2023, which is I don't think
yeah,
he'll hit 5 WAR, but man, this guy's going to be really good. He's the number one prospect in baseball for a reason, and he's part of the reason the Orioles are going to have a very bright future.
absolutely, yeah. Um, so let's talk about some concerns here with this Orioles team.
Yeah. So my biggest concern is the pitching. I mean, listen, like I said before, and I guess this kind of ties into where I said the offseason. Their best pitcher is probably Grayson Rodriguez, who has never pitched in the big leagues. And outside of him, I mean, you've got Kyle Gibson, who I just don't think is very good. I've been watching him the last couple of years. He's been on the Phillies, and my Braves have teed off on him. I mean,
Hmm.
Cole Irvin is maybe a number 5 type starter. Their other guys, Dean Kramer and Kyle Bradish, both really outperformed their peripherals last year, and I think that they're fine to have them in the rotation. And that's part of the thing about why they didn't add a ton, just because they have these guys who did perform okay last year at the big league level that they might want to get another look at while they feel like they're probably even adding another pitcher might not be a contender really. So I kind of get it, but that's why I didn't give them an F for their offseason grade. But yeah, and then their bullpen. I mean, Felix Bautista was really good last year, but he's also a guy who didn't really have a track record before last year. And while his stuff is really good, it'll be we'll see if he repeats it. And then the rest of their bullpen just isn't all that good either. I mean, they've got some no name guys who are young that pitched decent last year, and but I mean, they just don't have a ton there. I mean, Michael Givens isn't very good, and one thing to look forward to for this team is they do get John Means back at some point, most likely. So that'll help them a
Yeah,
lot when he comes back. And then, of course, with the prospects coming up, I mean, I think DL Hall ends up in the bullpen. I mean, I think he ends up being a bullpen arm eventually. I don't think he's got the stuff. I think he's got the stuff to start, but I don't think he'll have the control to start.
yeah, that
So I think, plus the injury history with him, I think that he definitely turns into like a dominant type bullpen arm. So I think that helps eventually in the bullpen. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, the pitching staff for me is the problem. Who is it that you were
well,
gonna go with?
you stole it. It's DL Hall.
Oh
He's
well,
so nasty. He had a 165 FIP when he came up to the majors last year, and he pitched mostly out of the bullpen. His stuff is absolutely electric. The problem for him is pretty consistently that the injury bug is going to be difficult for him to overcome if he's a starting pitcher. Can the Orioles optimize his usage is my main concern with DL Hall, which is a good thing to be concerned about, I think, because if they can figure out a way to optimize his ability, what I've seen recently is that the Cubs were using Keegan Thompson in like a 2 or 3 inning role to be just this dominant bullpen arm. Right, he was his fastball velocity ticked up, everything kind of ticked up in terms of nastiness, and then it translated into him being able to throw 3 innings consistently, which led him to being able to throw 5 innings consistently, and now he kind of looks like a starter. Can they figure out that optimization with DL Hall? That's, I think, the big question for this Orioles team going forward. I've got this Orioles team as being buyers at the deadline. I think they're going to be in contention all the way down. They may not make it to the playoffs, but I really want them to try and not be doing what they did last year and selling Trey Mancini and Jorge Lopez into the deadline, where then they ended up playing better afterwards anyway. And if they had just been adding at the deadline, they might have made the playoffs.
yeah, yeah, I get that. I will say on DL Hall, I don't just worry about the injury. I worry about the walks too. I mean, I know in the
Yeah.
big leagues last year, he only pitched 13 innings. So, but in AAA last year, 6 walks per 9. In
Yeah.
76 innings. I mean, that's a problem. But anyways, on their outlook for the year, I don't think I'm quite as high on them as you are because I think they're going to score a lot of runs. I just don't think that they're going to keep teams from scoring a lot of
Hmm.
runs. And I think last year they had some pretty good fortune in close games and stuff that kept them afloat most of the year. I think they're going to be a better team this year as a whole, but I don't think their record's going to be as good as last year. But I will say, I think they are a possible wild card contender. I see a scenario where they make the wild card. I think they probably sell at the deadline and not sell a lot, but maybe sell some small pieces that they brought in, maybe like an Adam Frazier type or Jorge Mateo or somebody that, you know, honestly it could be they could be in contention and sell because those guys might be blocking prospects. I mean, like
Yeah.
I- like I mentioned earlier with Jordan Westberg. I mean, they could sell Adam Frazier because he's blocking Jordan Westberg or something. So I could see a scenario where I could see a scenario where they're a contender, but I do think they're the fourth best team in the division right now. They're not too far off the Rays, honestly, but I do think they're
Yeah.
the fourth best team in the division right now.
No, I think that's absolutely fair. Yeah. And as you mentioned the Rays, let's move on to the Rays. Their offseason was punctuated by extending Yandy Diaz, Jeffrey Springs, uh, Peter Fairbanks, and then they also signed, or they did trade for the guy. Who was it? Signed Zach Eflin. That was their big offseason move, really. This is a team that was really good last year. They're really good every year. Their pitching development is amazing, but it's mostly an unchanged team from the team that I believe missed the playoffs last year. If
They made the
I'm
playoffs.
They made the playoffs as I think the third wild card team. So
Yep.
86 wins, a tough AL East division. I had this offseason as a B for them because of those extensions. Oh, it was, yeah, because of those extensions, right? I really liked that they let go of guys like Kevin Kiermaier that have been just kind of sitting around, and that they've gone out and tried to appease Yandy Diaz, right? They've signed him to a long term extension. The Wander Franco deal was last year, but they've already got him locked up. The Rays are spending money. They're keeping the money in house as well and rewarding those guys for performing well. I really like that that like Pete Fairbanks doesn't have to worry about a contract, right? He can just sit back and throw 100 miles an hour, and he's going to get paid regardless if he gets hurt. Jeffrey Springs can go in there and pitch from the left side and be a solid pitcher, and they've gone out and shown everyone, hey, we like Zach Eflin, and he was kind of the money, surprise starting pitcher value pick, and the Rays went out and spent money and acquired Zach Eflin, and he's jumping into their development system. So just overall, I think this is a really, really good offseason for the Rays, even though they didn't really add any big names. I don't think they needed to because this roster was already really good.
Yeah, I agree to a certain level. I gave them a C plus, so not too far off of your B grade. I thought that I was a little bit hoping that the Rays might bring in another piece. I think they're a team that screams above average to me. I don't think their upside is like World Series contender type,
Mm,
and I think it could have been if they would spend money. I think they could, but it's going to have to be more money than just extensions to a couple of guys that are kind of, I mean, I won't say value extensions, but not necessarily like big time extensions, but they're really just adding one player to their roster. Honestly, I mean, they might end up adding a you know uh, to somebody through one of these minor league signings or something, but which is something that the Rays do. I mean, they could they might have traded for somebody, or that's a current minor leaguer. They might add somebody. They do have some good farm system players still
oh
too.
yeah,
I mean,
oh yeah.
they've got some guys that it does suck that they lost, that they're not going to have Shane Baz because of Tommy John
Hmm.
surgery. But I think this team has a chance to be pretty good. I'm also glad they didn't trade Tyler Glass now, because there were some murmurs that might happen. But
Yep.
I think this team deserves to have him come back and run it back again. And I mean, I like their team, but I just, like I say, I like some of the extensions they signed, but I would have added a little bit more than just Zach Eflin, who I think is just kind of a back into the rotation swing guy, which I think is a great fit for what the Rays do, but is just, I would have liked to seen them add somebody else.
Right. I think I understand, but
Yeah.
it is the Rays, and they
Oh, I
are
know.
extremely adept at pitching development. One of the guys who was a success last year, who's now getting penciled in as like their number two, number three, number four starter, is Drew Rasmussen, who took what
Oh
he took a
yeah,
perfect
he's
game
good.
into the eighth inning last year against the Orioles. He's my guy
Yep.
that I really like. 2.84 ERA last year, 3.26 FIP, 3 WAR, just the quintessential Rays pitcher. He throws 96. He's got just a ton of pitches where he can really fool the hitters. Not the highest value guy. He got traded to the Rays in the JP Fireisen trade, I think, with Milwaukee, and he was like a throw in. And look at what the Rays have done with him. They took him. His walks are completely gone. He's got really good stuff. He's able to keep the ball on the ground. He doesn't give up hard contact. He's a quintessential Rays success story, and I only expect more things from him as he gets a full season in the starter's role.
Yeah, I really like that pick of Drew Rasmussen. I think he's a really good pitcher, and I liked him when he was with the Brewers,
Yeah,
and I
me too.
was like surprised the Rays got him in that trade. But the guy I picked is somebody who I'm sure you don't like me picking because of
Oh,
his
I
history,
love him.
but oh, I know.
I
It's
didn't want him to trade
Isaac.
him.
I know, I know. It's Isaac Paredes. I think it's how you say his name.
It's just
But
Isaac. Yeah, it's Isaac Paredes.
Isaac.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. They just call him. For some reason, I thought it was his name had some weird
I don't.
pronunciation, but
I don't think so.
um, he is a guy who is a very, very disciplined hitter. He doesn't strike out a lot. This past year in his 111 game, I guess it wasn't his debut season. He did play in the big leagues in 2020 and in 2021, but this was his first like semi full year at the big league level. 381 plate appearances, only a 17.6% walk rate to go with an 11% strikeout rate. I mean, 11%
Flip
walk rate
this.
and 17% strikeout rate. This for a 23-year-old in his first full big league season. He's a guy who he only hit 205, but he had a 195 BABIP. Now, looking at his history, his BABIP's never going to run very high because of his profile, but I mean, 195 is still almost unsustainably low. I would expect him to run somewhere around a 250 to 260 BABIP, which would put him more in that, with the same kind of profile that he hit, home run wise this year, I'd put him somewhere in like the 260s as a hitter, 270s as an average as a hitter. And with his walk rate, he could put up a 350, 360 on base percentage, and which would be pretty solid. That's a pretty solid on base percentage. And I think he's a guy who at the plate, I think it's going to be really good. He put up a 116 WRC plus last year with that bad luck. And I mean, if he gets a little bit better luck and continues to do what he did, he could have put up a 130 plus WRC plus. And that goes along with a guy who he was never thought of as a good defensive player. Like nobody thought he had a position or anything. But last year he played a utility role for them, 50 games at third, 43 games at second, 29 games at first, and he put up a positive defensive season. So this is a guy who, if he can continue to play good defense and maybe gets a little bit luckier with the bat, he could have a real breakout year. Put up, 4 or 5 wins above replacement. So, I really like Isaac Paredes coming into the season, and I think he's going to be a solid player for this team. And this is what the Rays do. They traded Austin Meadows for him, and Austin Meadows immediately falls off a cliff, and Isaac Paredes starts to break out in 2022. So I'd look forward to that continuing in 2023.
Just remember that Isaac Paredes is coming into his age 24 season.
I know.
Um,
It's
and
wild.
just for anybody unaware of the history with Isaac Paredes, he was traded in the 2017 deadline by the Cubs for Justin Wilson.
Oof.
Um, in a
And
trade where the Cubs also gave up Jeimer Candelario,
oh,
who played very well for the Tigers for a long time, and it was felt that Isaac Paredes was like a throw-in, right, to get Justin Wilson, who was horrible. So
yeah,
I never wanted them to trade Paredes, and then he's come up and he's actually been really good too now. So
yeah.
very frustrating, but a really good player, and I love his profile. His expected stats aren't all that good, so I do wonder if there's some regression there. But I also wonder if the lack of the shift will help Paredes be able to spray the ball around a little bit and get some of those pull hits. Uh, Moving into guys that we're worried about. I'm worried about another former Cub, Jason Adam. He was really good last year, but his control comes and goes. And Jason Adam was the type of guy who always like fooled a bunch of people, and then he would just melt down for the Cubs. And the Rays figured him out last year. I kind of feel like the meltdowns are coming for Jason Adam, and that he'll kind of revert back to being the guy who bounced around a bunch of teams the last couple of years before the Rays finally landed on him there. But this team is very difficult to pick out any weaknesses. The only other spot I was even considering was their catching position, where you've got Christian Bethancourt right now, but even still, like, he's a very well regarded defensive catcher, and they've got the offense in Francisco Mejia. So I this team is very strong. Where one of their best pitchers last year is one of the ones that I'm like targeting as maybe a guy I'm worried about. So
Yeah, the guy that I'm a little worried about is, and there were a few guys that I was thinking about picking on this list, but the guy, and it's not really that I'm that worried about him as much as it's the fact that I think that this might be his kind of make it or break it year, is
hmm,
Fadal Brujan.
yeah,
He's a guy who is a very high rated prospect and was knocking on the door of the major leagues in 2019, and
yeah,
he just, I mean, at the big league level, he just hasn't done it. I mean, he's done it at the AAA level on several occasions, but at the big league level, he just hadn't got it done. A 43 WRC plus in 52 games last year. Um, I mean, his plate discipline numbers have gone from being really good in the low minors to just being he doesn't strike out a lot, but his walk rates have dropped some since his early days in the lower minors. And I mean, I think everything in his profile screams he's going to be good, but his batting average on balls in play has been consistently like below 300 through his last few years. And for a guy who's not going to hit for a lot of power, that's not a very good profile to have. In fact, in the fan or the Zips projection system, they project him for 484 plate appearances this year and only 8 home runs.
yeah.
So
He's
now
not
he
a
is
not a
gonna
power guy.
right. So he is gonna run well. The stolen bases are gonna be nice, but um, and he plays. By all accounts, he plays pretty good defense. You could, in center field, he can also play the infield some. I think he played 31 games at second base last year.
Yeah,
but he came up, played a lot of outfield too, so he could end up being like a really good speed contact oriented utility guy in the future. But this is kind of a make it break it year because this is a guy who they were talking about coming up at age 21, and now he's 25 and he still hasn't really put it together at all at the big league level. So for a
Yeah.
former top 30 prospect, I think it's starting to get crunch time, and I'm a little bit worried about him going forward. He was a guy I once thought was going to be like a centerpiece for this Rays franchise, and he just hasn't ended up being that.
Right. Well, I've got this Rays team winning like 85 to 90 games again, being in contention for that wild card spot and being a really good team. I'm rather certain you'll agree here. This is just a solid roster with a very good opportunity to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree. This is a solid team for me, and I don't know where the upside is with it because I mean, like some of their lineup, they got a few pieces in their lineup, but some of their lineups just not. They're going to be. I think we're pretty certain they're going to be solid. They're just not going to have a super high upside. Guys like Manny Margot or you know Jose Siri, Christian Bethancourt. Like we don't think they're terrible, but the players, but they're just their upside's not really there with them. And then I do think that maybe a breakout for Wander Franco could go a long way for this team, and hopefully the pitching stays healthy this year. But I agree. I think they're a pretty good wild card type team. So
All right. Well, the only bit of news we have over the last 2 weeks comes with our next team. It is the Toronto Blue Jays. They signed Chad Green to a 2-year, $8.5 million deal with a third-year option. On top of that, we're looking at this Blue Jays off season, which was extremely busy compared to the other teams. They traded for Dalton Varsho. They traded away Teoscar Hernandez for Swanson, I believe. They traded they signed Kevin Kiermaier. This has been a rather busy offseason for the Toronto Blue Jays. How would you grade the offseason? And in so doing, what do you think of the Chad Green move?
um, well, I gave them a B plus on
Oh,
their offseason.
Chris Bassett, too. Forgot about
Yeah,
Chris Bassett. Sorry.
and Brandon Belt.
Yep, and Belt.
Um,
There's the other two.
Yeah, I gave them a B plus on their off season. I thought that they did a good job. I think that some of the guys they traded away. I mean, I like Dalton Varsho. I don't think I'm quite as high on Dalton Varsho as you and Damien have been. I like him, but I don't know if I would have given up a top 10 prospect for him in baseball by a lot of accounts. I think that that might have been a high price to pay, and then giving up Teoscar Hernandez, who's been a really solid hitter for you, for a reliever who's pretty good, but not like some elite reliever is. I thought it was a little bit rich, but I think this is not to mention the fact they gave up Gurriel in that Varsho trade as well. But I thought that they did a good job. I like the Chris Bassett signing. I think they needed to add a little bit more depth to their rotation. And then I would have liked to have seen them add maybe another bullpen arm at some point. But everything else, I think that the guys that they added in their lineup are good. I think Kevin Kiermaier helped stabilize center field defense for them. I think that Brandon Belt adds a left-handed bat, which I think they made it a point to go out and get a couple left-handed bats because this lineup was super
Yeah.
right-handed heavy last year, and I think that helps. They've still got a good catching tandem with Alejandro Kirk, who will DH a good bit too, and then Danny Jansen, who's a really solid catcher himself. Um, I like this team. I don't think they had to do a ton, and I don't think they did an awful lot, but they did some good things, and I gave them a B plus. So
I'm right there with you. A minus for me, but the difference being that I think the Dalton Varsho
yeah,
move was exactly the right kind of move for this team, where you trade from a strength to fill a desperate weakness. And I know I said that a lot on the Varsho podcast a few episodes ago when we talked about this trade, but it he was maybe the best left-handed bat that moved this offseason. I don't know that there were really that many more, like, because a lot of those bats were righty. We were thinking about the Cubs getting left-handed bats, and there was like almost nobody that you could think of, right? It was like all the bats were righty this offseason, it seemed like, except for like
yeah,
Jock Peterson, right? So you know ultimately this was a the smart move to go ahead and get a really strong left-handed bat with a ton of defensive versatility and upside in Varsho when you're dealing out of a strength, right? With Kirk and Jansen, those guys are really solid. They'll be able to, the three of them really will be able to hold down that catcher position for this team. I just like this offseason a lot for the Blue Jays. My preferred player to talk about real quick is Bo Bichette because the end of the season last year, his second half was really, really good. Um, and I'm trying to pull it up quickly. Should have had our producer do that. Um, but second half, Bo Bichette last year, he hit 337 with a 378 on base and a 543 slugging for 921 OPS and a 163 WRC plus. He went insane that second half. He had a long hitting streak. He had some games where he was just the reason the Blue Jays won. He's a streaky hitter. He's not the best defender, but this is what you've got with a guy like Bo Bichette, with someone this electric, is that you're going to get those streaks, and it's almost a Javi Baezian approach, but without the swing and miss, where you're getting that just the power, the speed, the contact, but you're getting it all wrapped into a young 24-year-old shortstop with who has now like 4 years of MLB experience. I think he's an all-star for years to come, and he's going to be the reason this team gets to the playoffs again next year. And he's maybe like a small adjustment, a couple of small adjustments, maybe in the taking pitches category, away from being a perennial all star and MVP candidate. Bo Bichette's coming into his age 25 season too. Like I'm just looking for him to have a massive year.
Yeah, you mentioned I like Bo Bichette too, but you mentioned the swing and the walk, take a pitch every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
That would go a long way for him. But the guy I wanted to pick for mine is I think that he got overshadowed an awful lot last year, and it's
Mm-hmm.
Matt Chapman. Matt
Yep,
Chapman was really good last year. He had a
he sure
117
was.
WRC plus, and his defense wasn't as good last year as it typically has been. And I think his defense will bounce back. I don't think that's a skill that just went away. I think it's just more of defensive metrics are wonky than anything else. And I mean, he put up over 4 wins above replacement last year, and just about nobody's talking about it.
Yeah,
And in fact, I think a lot of people were talking about him being a disappointment. And I can't imagine actually thinking that. But I think that this year, I think his batting average on balls in play will bounce back just a little bit. And he's not going to be. And his strikeout rate dropped back down to 27% last year, where it had been over 30% 2 years in a row. And I definitely think this is a guy who I think he might touch 240 with the average, but he walks a pretty good bit, over 10%, and puts up a 330 on base, and he slugs. He hit 27 home runs last year. He's a 30 home run potential guy again this year. And with his defense, I think he's one of the best players on this team. In fact, I think he could end up having a higher WAR than Bo Bichette this year because of the defense. And I think that there's a lot of guys on this team to like. I mean, you can obviously like Vlad Jr. and Springer, and I mean this team's got some great players. But I just wanted to shout out Matt Chapman just because nobody talks about him. I mean, and I think he deserved to get talked about a lot more last year.
just taking a look through Matt Chapman's stats. Second half, he had a 129 WRC
Yeah,
plus on the strength of a 14% walk rate, but he also struck out more in the second half. I think Matt
yeah.
Chapman might be at his best when he's a three true outcomes hitter, which is weird to say because that's not always what you want, especially with the shift going away. But I think when Matt Chapman is working walks and trying to crank the ball over the fence, he is the best hitter he can be. Um, and it was clear there in the second half. But as for someone you're worried about, who would that be?
Well, I think the easy answer is Jose Barrios. He was awful last year. Like
Mm-hmm.
they traded for him in 2021. They signed him to a long extension, and last year he was absolutely horrible. He put up a 5.23 ERA last year, and I mean, 4.55 FIP was didn't really show that 5.23 ERA was that much of a fluke. I mean, he pitched 172 innings, so he didn't deal with any injuries or anything. He's just bad. His strikeout rate nosedived, dropped over two strikeout or dropped almost two full strikeouts per nine. His ground ball rate dropped. His batting average allowed on balls in play went up, which could signal a little bit of bad luck. But I think part of it was just getting hit harder. And his off speed pitches, he's been famous for his curveball, and it just wasn't as good last year. Didn't get a lot of swing and miss. Even when he had good games, a lot of it was, he was getting a lot of pitches fouled off and stuff, where that used to be a swing and a miss. I remember watching some games where it just seemed like he could not put guys away. Um, and I just don't know if he's gonna rebound. I mean, he'll probably rebound to a certain level, but this is a guy who, in his past, I mean, his best season was 2021, where he put up a 3.52 ERA. And I mean, that's good. He was good in 2021. He was good in 2019 as well. But, a mid threes ERA is kind of his peak. And being an innings eating number three, number four isn't really what Toronto thought they were getting. I think they thought they were getting a guy who was a number two at worst when they brought him in. And I mean, there was a lot of buzz about him coming into last year about being a potential like Cy Young dark horse type guy. In fact, I think Damian picked him to win Cy Young
Yeah, he
last
did.
year. And I mean, and it would, and it wasn't a totally foolish pick at the time. I mean, there were a lot of people picking him. So, I, I mean, I don't think he's going to be very good. I also just want to throw in while we're talking about it. I also don't think Alek Manoah is quite as good as he was last year too. I think Alek Manoah is a very good pitcher, but he had some pretty good luck last year. He's not a 2.24 ERA type pitcher. He's a good pitcher. He's not that good. And I think he'll have some regression, although I think he'll still be a really good pitcher. He'll have some regression from that. So just want to
Jose
throw that in there.
Barrios. Jose Barrios' Statcast page is really interesting. He's got a positive 17 run value on the four seam fastball, which in a pitcher's case is they gave up 17 more runs, I think, than
Yeah.
the average pitch. His fastball was the reason he was bad last year. It was really bad. His sinker was, by contrast, -4, so four above average, I guess, for a pitcher. Allowed four less runs. And his curveball was also above average. I think if you just did away with his four seam fastball, let him throw sinkers, I think he'd be a far better pitcher. So fastball, the issue for Jose Barrios. My guy is Kevin Kiermaier. I don't like that signing. I don't think Kevin Kiermaier is the kind of guy you can rely on really. I think they'll need to either address that with trade or he's going to get hurt down the stretch. But a 1 year deal is not bad. I just think for 2023 you can't be relying on Kevin Kiermaier in center field. Hopefully George Springer can play center and they can kind of dodge around Kiermaier's injuries and just platoon him. But I don't like that signing.
I think that's kind of their expectation is honestly for him
Yeah,
for Springer to play center and then Kiermaier to be like a fourth outfielder, come in and to play center late in games type guy. Because he is a really good defender, but yeah, I don't think he's an everyday player at this stage. But moving on, I guess we'll talk about where we think this team's going to be at this year. Um, and I think they're a World Series contender. I don't think I'd put them on the top of my World Series list,
hmm.
but I think they're definitely a contender. I think they'll be. I think they're probably the favorite in the division going in. And I mean, I like their lineup a lot, and I like their. I'm a little worried about their bullpen. Um, and their rotation's going to be really good. Even if Jose Barrios struggles, I mean, I think Kevin Gossman is really, really, really good. Alek
Yeah,
Manoah, even though I said I didn't like him, I think he's still a good pitcher. I just don't think he's as good as he was last year. That doesn't mean I think he's bad. And I think Chris Bassett was a really good move to bring in a guy who's going to be a really, really stable number three. And I think they're a good team. I think, like I say, I think they'll win. Somewhere. I don't think they're going to win 100 games, but I think they'll be in the 90 win category, somewhere in the mid 90 wins, and definitely probably my favorite for the division right now. So I like them a lot.
they're my favorite for the division, and I think this is an 100-win team. I think they've fixed their flaws from last year where they couldn't catch the Yankees, and the Yankees are almost exactly the same team. So we'll talk about the Yankees right now, but I really like what the steps this Blue Jays team has made, and then they don't have to play the Yankees as many times this year, and I think they'll beat up on a lot of the teams that are worse with the worst pitching. Their lineup is going to be very difficult for most teams to get through. So we'll go to the Yankees now. Remember, the Yankees re-signed Aaron Judge, re-signed Anthony Rizzo, signed Carlos Rodon, and that's about it. Their offseason was pretty menial aside from their kind of retention of the two big bats and then the signing of Rodon. They also brought Tommy Kahnle back from the Dodgers. And a lot of their moves have been made previously. Frankie Montas, Scott Efros. Uh, this is a team that they know what they are, right? They're an NLCS loser, basically. They think they've lost the NLCS 4 years in a row, 3 years in a row, something like that, or three of the last four, something like that. It's definitely a frustrating time, even though there's a lot of success happening right now in New York.
Yeah, I gave him for my grade. I gave him a B plus. I thought that or sorry, I gave him an A minus. I thought that I thought that they absolutely had to bring Aaron Judge back, and they did. So that was a good move. I really like the Carlos Rodon addition. I think it adds two things for him. It adds a lefty, and it adds a guy who I think is when he's healthy, which that's kind of the question mark with Rodon. I think he's like a top 10 pitcher in baseball when he's healthy. He's really, really, really good. And you add that to Garrett Cole, I mean, that's a 1-2 punch that is going to be very difficult to hit down the stretch, and it also lengthens their starting rotation too. Because I mean, Luis Severino is better than a number three, I think, for most teams. And then, we'll see what Nestor Cortez does to back up his year he had last year, but he was a very good pitcher last year, and he's like their number four. And then Frankie
Mm-hmm.
Montas is their number five if he's healthy. So like that is an insane rotation that they have if they're all healthy and ready to go. So I think that this is a pretty good team. And like I say, I thought the additions they made were the guy they had to add. They they did address their bullpen with Tommy Kahnle. I do think their bullpen needed some work, and I mean Tommy Kahnle is a pretty good addition. We'll see what he brings this year. I know that he's dealt with injuries, and last year, he I, he came up with the back up with the Dodgers, only pitched 12 innings, and he was pretty good in his 12 innings. So we'll see if he's able to, come back strong this year. If he comes back to being the guy he was last time he pitched in New York, then they're they did good. So, but that's
Yep.
kind of the question mark. But I really like their offseason. I mean, I probably would have maybe tried to add another bat, but I mean, adding Anthony Rizzo back was big. So I think this is a good team, and I like what they did.
Don't forget they'll also be adding Michael King back. I didn't name my number there, but it's a B for me because they didn't address some of the issues with this roster, right? This roster is extremely top heavy, like 99th percentile top heavy.
Yeah,
Last year, Aaron Judge as a number one player on his team in wins above replacement to the number two player on his team offensively in wins above replacement. That was Jose Trevino last year. The gap was the most it's ever been from 1 to 2 in any team, like in the like recorded or something like that. It's astronomical. So I worry that they didn't do enough. I think they were bandying about trading Gleyber Torres. They didn't do anything about Aaron Hicks. They didn't add another catcher. It's still Trevino and Higashioka. Um, can DJ LeMahieu get going? This is a questionable overall roster. One place that's not questionable is that Garrett Cole's the ace. He's
yeah.
somebody we don't talk about at this point, and I think he even gets unfair hate. I think from Yankees fans because he's not been particularly great in the most important situations. But this is a guy who's come in and been a rock solid elite top end pitcher for them all 3 years he's been there with tons of strikeouts. Last year he got bit a little more by the long ball, but he's throwing 98 miles an hour. He hasn't fallen off from his Houston days. He's got a lock as an ace in Yankee Stadium, and he's able to make that work. And last year he was good in the playoffs. Garrett, we don't talk about Garrett Cole a lot because you just kind of expect him to be good at this point. But he's on a Hall of Fame track. He probably needs another Cy Young and a bunch more years like his last couple. But he's projected for 4 wins above replacement again. He's thrown 200 innings in 5 of the last 7 full seasons, or 7 seasons total, but 6 full seasons. So he's reliable, durable, just really solid. I like Garrett Cole a lot here. I think he's going to be another good season.
Yeah, I agree on Garrett Cole. I think he's really good. And I just wanted to, I guess, with my guy, I wanted to reiterate on Rodon. I I mean, in this last 2 years, I mean, in 2021 with the White Sox,
Hmm.
he did deal with some injuries, which is the real setback with him at this point. But he, as a pitcher in 130 innings, he had a 2.37 ERA and 5 WAR.
Hmm.
And then in 2022 with the Giants and on a 1 year deal because of the fear of injuries, or I think it was actually like a 3 year deal, but they hit an opt out. He threw 178 innings, so he was closer to that milestone. And I think the Giants also just kind of limited his innings. I don't think he ever got hurt last year. But he had a 2.88 ERA with a 2.25 FIP and 6 WAR. So in his last 2 years,
Yeah.
a guy who hasn't, I mean, he was limited a little bit in 2021 by injury. He still put up over 11 wins above replacement in his last 2 years. And this guy, he's really, really, really good. And I think that we'll see what happens with him this year. And if he stays healthy, I mean, adding him to Garrett Cole, I mean, you've got two like legit number ones if you put those two guys together.
Right.
And I think that's I don't know. I really like Carlos Rodon. I think the Yankees fans are going to really like him too.
As for I know you've written down. As for uh your worrisome player, who you got, I think it might stir the Yankees fans slightly.
Yeah, well, I have one that I just wanted to throw out just for conversation. Then I have one that I actually am worried about. The one I just wanted to kind of throw out is Aaron Judge. And you know why Aaron Judge is a player I don't feel that great about? It's because last year he put up 11 WAR, and you're just like it feels like the Yankees are almost relying on him to do that again. I mean, and he's not going to do that again, in my opinion. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, he put up a historic season. You can't ask somebody to put up a 62 home run, 207 WRC plus, 11 wins above replacement season again. I mean, putting up 7 wins this year is very possible for him, which is why I say it's hard to say I'm worried about him. But I mean, he has to carry the Yankees like he did last year for them to be a World Series favorite. And I just don't see him doing that. And that's why I said I'm worried about him, just because I don't think that he's going to do what I think he's going to have such unreal expectations this year that he's not going to live up to them. But the guy I'm actually like worried about is Giancarlo Stanton. We could have said this a few years in a row, but of course, even like in the past, he's still been like in 2021, we could have said we're worried about Giancarlo Stanton, but he still had a 354 on base, 516 slugging, 35 home runs, 137 WRC plus, put up 2.5 wins above replacement for a DH. He was still really good. Last year he dealt with the injuries again, and he just wasn't that good. His strikeout rate was up, his walk rate was it's about the same, but he had a sub 300 on base percentage last year and a 462 slugging, which just isn't Giancarlo Stanton like numbers. And I mean, a guy who he's 33 years old, he's struggling to he's not quite he can't really play the field that much anymore, even though they did play him out there some, I think, last year in the outfield. He's dealt with so many injuries, and their performance last year just wasn't all that great. I mean, a 211 average, a 227 BABIP definitely contributed to that, but still, I mean, I just I just don't know. I just don't know about Giancarlo Stanton going forward. I think he's going to hit home runs still, but I just don't think he's going to be that like elite level hitter that he used to be. And it's the decline. I think he's gonna put up a 110 to 120 WRC plus this year, rather than that 130 to 140 number that he really needs to as a high priced DH for New York. So I think the real thing to watch with him is the home run numbers. I mean, he's a guy that's a potential 500 home run guy if he can continue to play. And he's at 378 right now, so if he has a decent year, he could get up to 400 this year. And we'll see what happens with that going forward. But I just don't see him as being like a middle of the order big time bat anymore. But we'll see.
Here's my like brief rebuttal on Giancarlo, and then I'll go into my guy because we're running low on time here. He did have a somewhat unlucky numbers per
Yeah,
Statcast and was 100th percentile in max exit velocity and 99th percentile in average exit velocity and 98th percentile in barrel percentage and 98th percentile in hard hit. He is still mashing the ball. He also was 85th percentile in walk rate.
yeah.
He's not dead. I don't think is kind of the idea. He's not done. He's got the skills, he's got the mash. It's just going to require, I think, healthiness and then also like health and then also rhythm. He got out of the rhythm a lot because of those little nagging injuries last year and wasn't able to put up the same numbers because I think he was out of rhythm and kind of in and out of the lineup a lot. So can the Yankees get Giancarlo Stanton into rhythm is a big question. The other big question is, can DJ LeMahieu slug anymore? This is his second consecutive season off of two 500 slugging seasons
Yeah.
in 2019 and 2020. Since then, he's been slugging 370 in the last two seasons, and that's in Yankee Stadium where we expect you to be slugging way higher than that. Uh, LeMahieu's plate approach is good, but he's not dangerous, and I think that plate approach is going to start coming down with pitchers realizing that they are not getting punished by DJ LeMahieu like they were in 2019 and 2020. 26 home runs, 20 and then 10 in the shortened season. I just 10 in 2021, 12 last year. DJ LeMahieu's got to hit for more power if he's going to stick in this Yankees lineup because they really need that like third hitter, behind Judge. Well, they're the fourth hitter behind Judge, Rizzo, Stanton, but Stanton's been out, so really it's just been Judge and Rizzo. They've got to have that other guy that can get on base in front of them. LeMahieu's really just not doing that well enough right now. It seems like their lineup it gets very disconnected without him.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, DJ LeMahieu is a guy who I think was a juice ball guy. He got the
Yeah,
combination of
for
juice
sure.
ball plus moving into Yankee Stadium that he had a lot of home runs, but for a year or two. But this is the guy he's always been. I mean, he
Hmm.
has good plate approach, but he just doesn't slug. So, but yeah, moving on to our to our outlook. I think the Yankees are I think they're probably like the top wild card team, and I think they're good. I think that the pitching staff's going to carry them. The lineup has some good pieces, but it's not all that deep. They do have some upside in their lineup. You know, you've got a young guy like Oswald Peraza who could end up, taking off this year or something. Like, you've got some variance there. And you got a bunch of bounce back candidates too. A guy like, like you mentioned, DJ LeMahieu could bounce back some compared to what he did last year. I mean, Giancarlo Stanton, like I said, I'm worried about him, but at the same time, like, he's a guy who might bounce back some. I mean, they are aging. I mean, you've got like 33-year-old Aaron Hicks in the outfield. You've got 34-year-old or soon to be 34-year-old Anthony Rizzo, 37-year-old Josh Donaldson. I mean, it's a tough team to predict because I just don't know how good the lineup is. I don't think the bullpen's very good, but the starting pitching is insane, and the lineup's got upside. So I do think that they're the top wild card team, but this is a team to watch out for on the health front because they have a lot. They had a lot of injuries last year, and this year, I mean, between Garrett Cole will probably be healthy, but Carlos Rodon is a guy who's been injured a lot, and Frankie Montas is already injured and he gets injured a lot. So I mean, your one injury, Luis Severino's dealt with injuries a lot. That strength in that rotation could turn into we're not so sure about this thing very, very quickly. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully they stay healthy and we get to see what this team could be capable of. But I definitely think they're a wild card team, and I think they're probably my top wild card team if I had to guess today.
I certainly wouldn't be surprised if the Yankees win this division. But I like the Blue Jays a little bit more. I would say the Yankees are like 90 to 95 wins. I got Blue Jays like 95 to 100. So, they won't be able to go head to head as often this year, and I think that's what contributes to it. Because I think if you place these teams head to head, you'd pick the Yankees over the Blue Jays in 19 games, you'd give the Yankees like a 3 or 4 game advantage. In 12 games, you'd probably pick them 50-50, right? So that's where I'm kind of maybe the Yankees +1. So that's where I think the gap comes. And I think this Yankees team is a wild card team with every opportunity to go back to the championship series again, and can they make that final step? I don't know. I think they'll need to do something at the deadline in order to make that happen. So, uh, that is the AL East. We were 10 minutes over an hour, but Matt, any final thoughts before we head out here tonight?
I think this is an interesting division. It's one of the highest. I think it's going to be one of the better divisions in baseball. I think there's a lot of variance in this division too, because I mean there is a scenario, and like I say, I don't like the Red Sox roster, but there's a scenario where they end up being better than they're expected to be, and end up contending. And there's a scenario where like the Yankees are awful. Like there's a scenario where that happens. These aging players stink, and their rotation has a couple injuries. Like so I mean I really don't think the Blue Jays are going to be awful. I don't think that's really a thing, um, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens in this division. And then also, we just wanted to bring up before at the end of the show that the World Baseball Classic is this year. So some pitchers and catchers are reporting in 1 week to
Yep,
the spring training sites, which is kind of awesome. So by the time we have our next episode, there will be players at spring training, which is
yep,
very good to hear. So,
yep. We'll be out next week. Next week's our
yep.
designated off week there before, and then we will be weekly from here to the beginning of the season. So enjoy your week off, and we'll
Yeah.
see you guys in 2 weeks. It should be fun.
Yep, it should be, and hope Damien feels better, and I'm sure he'll be back with us in a couple weeks, actually talking instead of just listening. So,
Right. So, thanks everyone again. This has been the Bat Flip Podcast. We will see you guys next time.
thanks everybody.